Dad said, "Go slap your sister and I'll buy her a porcelain doll." I was 10 years old, and that sound cracked the whole Christmas open. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and overboiled ham, a sweetness that clung to the curtains and made the lights on the tree look sticky. Frost webbed the window over the sink. My mother had drawn a little star there earlier, and it had melted into a tear. Robert, my father, sat at the head of the table with his wallet already open, counting bills with 2 thick fingers. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He didn't need to. His voice moved through the room the way cold does when you open the back door, without asking permission. Sophie watched him from the opposite chair, her legs swinging just above the floor, Christmas socks flashing reindeer snouts. On the buffet behind her, the glass cabinet glowed with reflections, platters, a gravy boat shaped like a swan, and on the top shelf the dolls my mother kept for show. Glazed faces, unblinking. Sophie had pressed her nose to that glass all week, whispering to the doll in the corner with the blue silk ribbon. Soon. Dad slipped a 20 out like a magician producing the inevitable. "We don't whine in this house," he said, glancing at Sophie's small pout. "We learn lessons." Then finally he lifted his eyes to me. "Go on." My mouth tasted of peppermint and metal. I looked at Sophie. Her cheeks were pink, the exact color the sky turns before the sun gives up. She knew she had already won. I could feel it, the way you feel static before a shock. I pushed my chair back, and the legs made a long, crying sound on the linoleum. "Dad?" I tried, but the word folded on itself. He set the 20 on the table as if he were putting down a rulebook. "Ellen," he said, slower, "don't make me repeat myself at dinner." Sophie's lashes fluttered like she was about to speak in a language only he could hear. She lifted her chin toward me. I took one step, then another, and I saw our reflections caged together in the cabinet glass. Me, thin as a bookmark. Her, centered, the page itself. The tree blinked behind us, green and red and green, and the ornaments trembled with the furnace's breath. My hand felt like it belonged to the wrong story. Dad's palm hovered above the bill. "A lesson," he confirmed. I didn't touch my sister. She moved first. A flash of her sleeve, a sharp intake of breath that wasn't mine, and then the bright slap of her palm across my cheek. It cracked open the lights and the star on the window and the humming in the baseboard heater. For a second, I saw nothing but white, like someone had turned the world to classroom chalk and blown on it. The heat rose on my skin in the shape of her small hand. "See?" she said, breathless, triumphant but soft, like she was proud of both of us. "See, Daddy?" The room steadied. Sophie's lips tilted, and she turned to him as if she had just recited lines perfectly. He was already nodding, already reaching for her shoulder, already telling her she had done the right thing, defending herself, standing up. A good girl. The 20 vanished. He tucked his wallet away as if closing a door on a lesson completed. I tasted blood. My mother appeared in the doorway and then disappeared again, a ghost of an apron and a hesitation. The swan gravy boat smiled its porcelain smile. On the tree, a glass teardrop ornament held my warped face, red and small and ridiculous. I imagined pressing my cheek against the snow outside and letting the cold flatten the sting, letting it erase me into something clean and blank as the yard. "Go wash your hands, sweetheart," Dad murmured to Sophie, and she skipped to the sink, humming the carol from the school pageant. He followed her, rough fingers turning the faucet, rubbing her hands in the water like a christening.
Over his shoulder, he said, conversational as weather. You can't just sit there, Ellen.
You have to learn where the line is, I stood. My legs shook. A small tremor only the tin soldiers on the mantel seemed to notice. Dad, I began again, because there had to be a version of the evening where words could open like a door and air could come in. Dad, Don't ruin your sister's night, he said, without turning. The sentence fell like a lid. Through the thin wall, I could hear the rustle of wrapping paper in the living room, the television murmuring a parade of other families who were better at this than we were. Sophie shut off the tap with a flourish, shook her hands, and reached for the towel with a seriousness that made her look, for a second, like someone's mother. She glanced over at me and then at the cabinet, and I followed her gaze to the top shelf where the blue ribbon doll waited, with its painted lips parted just enough to show it would never, ever need to eat.
Tomorrow, Dad said, drying Sophie's hair with his palm. We'll go pick it up.
You've earned it. The words slid under my skin and arranged themselves beside the throb of my cheek. I thought of the schoolyard and the places where girls could decide to be kind and sometimes did, and how none of those places existed at this table. I thought of Christmas lists and how mine had been short because I had made it with my mother, who didn't have to say we couldn't afford much, because her hands said it for her when she folded laundry into neat, apologetic squares. I thought of the way Sophie had looked at me before her hand met my face. Not angry, not even mean, only certain. My chair was still at an angle from when I'd risen. I slid it back in as quietly as I could, and the legs whispered surrender. The hot, cold sting on my cheek pulsed like the blinking lights. My mother came in with a bowl of green beans and set it on the table with a smile so careful, I wanted to cup it in my palms so it wouldn't fall and shatter. Her eyes skimmed my face and then darted away, as if pain were rude company we shouldn't acknowledge in front of guests. We ate in a hush that pretended to be peace. Dad told a story about a sale at the hardware store, and Sophie laughed on cue, a bell rung by someone else's hand. My fork tapped my plate once, twice, 3 times, and I forced it to stop, because in our house sound was permission, and I didn't want to grant any more of it. I counted my breaths. I counted the sequins on Sophie's collar. I counted the dots and the pattern of the tablecloth, and when the numbers didn't help, I counted backward, undoing the night, unstringing the lights, unwinding the clock to before the sentence that had split it in 2. Sophie leaned against Dad's arm and told him which doll she wanted, the one with the real lashes and the blue shoes. It's special, she whispered, as if confiding a secret plan only winners get to have. It's for girls who know how to behave. My mother's hand, under the table, found my knee for a second and squeezed. It was a small thing, like the moment the furnace turns on before you hear it. Then she withdrew, and the silence slid back into place. I pushed away from the table at last, glass chiming along the cabinet as my chair bumped it. In the reflection, 3 people sat framed as neatly as any holiday portrait. I looked taller than I felt. The ornament teardrop offered me my own face again, now faded to a pink oath. Somewhere down the block a dog barked at nothing, and I wished I had a mouth that brave. I walked to the buffet to set down my plate. In the glass, the blue ribbon doll stared back at me with her perfect, useless eyes. I lifted my fingers and felt the heat still living in my skin, the outline of a hand that wasn't mine. and I made myself memorize it the way you memorize a map out of a place. Justice is the gift this house never wraps for you, I told the girl in the glass, so quietly no one could steal it and turn it into a lesson against me. Ellen gently touched her swollen cheek, looking at the porcelain doll in the glass cabinet. The promise was locked. Years later, the slap returned, not from a porcelain doll, but from my own child. Late afternoon light smeared across the kitchen like butter that wouldn't quite melt. The table was a small battlefield of crayons, mail, and a cereal box Matt had turned into a fort. The dishwasher muttered to itself. The fridge clicked and sighed. Maple Ridge always grew quiet on weekends, as if the whole town were holding its breath for a better story to arrive. Ours never did. Carl lounged in the doorway, phone in hand, thumb moving like a metronome of disinterest. "Traffic's going to be a mess if we don't leave soon," he said, to no one in particular. He meant the amusement park an hour away. He meant Sophie, who had texted that she had extra passes just for Matt. She arrived a moment later with a bright scarf and a brighter smile, the kind that promised everyone would have a good time as long as they wanted what she wanted. Matt bounded to her immediately. "Aunt Sophie, can we go now?" "Please." She glanced over my shoulder at the oven, where rabbit-shaped cookies browned behind the glass. "We'll see, buddy. We have to ask your dad, not your mom, your dad." Her eyes slid past me the way a skater avoids a rough patch of ice. "I already told him," Carl said, pocketing his phone. "He's been good all week." "Haven't you, champ?" Matt's face shone. "I'm good if I don't have to eat the bunny cookies." Something in me tightened, a thread winding around a spool. I pulled the tray from the oven and set it on the counter to cool. The little rabbit stared up with chocolate dot eyes, the way a child stares at a parent who's late to pick him up, hopeful, then embarrassed. I said, "They're for after dinner." "Dinner," Sophie cooed, "is a roller coaster and a corn dog." She laughed as if she'd invented childhood. I folded the oven mitts carefully. "Sophie, you didn't ask me." She placed a hand to her chest as if I'd presented her with a bouquet. "Ellen, oh my God, of course! I just thought, Carl said, well, we're all family." She tilted her head in the direction of Carl, the air between them tightening with the kind of sympathy that's really a rope. Carl stretched, feigning boredom. "It's just the park." "Don't make it a thing," Matt tugged. Sophie's sleeve, already bouncing on his toes. "Can we go now? Dad said we have to check if Mom's mad first." Carl smirked. "Relax, he's 5. He says stuff." "Stuff," I repeated, because I needed a word that wouldn't shatter. I crouched to Matt's level. "We can go together next weekend, okay? I made these for you." He wrinkled his nose. "I'm tired of your food." Then, like a scripted line he'd practiced in front of the mirror with someone else, he added, "Dad says parks are for fun moms." The silence after that line rang as loud as a bell. I straightened slowly. Sophie's smile flickered, then returned at full wattage. "Oh, sweetie," she said to me, slipping a hand across my shoulder in a theatrical half-embrace. "He didn't mean it. It's just a joke." "A joke is when adults hide behind a child's smile," I heard myself say, the words steady and low. Sophie's hand lifted off me as if my skin had burned it. Carl chuckled, but his eyes hardened. He tapped the table once, twice. "Matt," he said lightly, "you want the park? Here's a test. Go give Mom a little slap. He held up 2 fingers, pinching a measure of air. Tiny.
She won't mind. Then she'll know you're only kidding. I didn't understand the world for one breath. It stopped making the contract it usually makes with my eyes and ears. Then it rushed back with the clatter of Matt's sneakers. He stepped in close. His hand was small and warm and so fast, and the sound it made was a clean crack that cut the afternoon in half. For a heartbeat, the room split into 2 kitchens, the one I occupied and the one I had never escaped. Matt flinched at his own courage, eyes round, searching Carl's face for approval like a diver looking up for the surface. Sophie clapped her palms once, soft and delighted. See? Just a joke. He's such a brave boy. The heat bled across my cheek. I tasted salt and something metallic that might have been memory. I put the cookie tray between us, as if sugar could become a shield. Matt, I said, very calmly, that hurt. He glanced back at Carl, who was grinning like the lesson was going perfectly. Is she mad? Matt whispered to him, not to me. I set a rabbit cookie on a plate and slid it toward my son. Try this, still warm. He shook his head so hard the collar of his shirt trembled. No, I said I'm tired of your food. He folded his arms because he had learned that crossing them could make him look older, which is to say farther away. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Sophie blossomed on the screen as if she'd been waiting for the moment to flower. Don't be jealous. We're just trying to make him happy. Let go. Seconds later, another bubble. He'll bring you a prize if you smile. Carl took the plate, cookie and all, from Matt's hesitant hand and pressed it into mine, fingers pinching hard enough to hurt. Don't be childish in front of him, he said, almost tender. You're scaring him. I looked at the rabbit, its chocolate eyes glossy with a shine I refused to call tears. I breathed in, out, as if I were trying not to blow out candles that weren't mine. The park will still be there next weekend, I said, because I had to put a sentence in the air that didn't bruise. Sophie brushed imaginary crumbs from Matt's shoulder. Come on, buddy. We'll be late. She turned toward the door with a dancer's pivot, already half a picture in her head. Sunset behind them, rides ahead, the mother cropped out. Wait, I said. Matt paused, toeing the tile, arms loose now, the child needing instructions. I offered him the plate again. Just a bite. For me. He looked up at Carl once more, the way a question looks for a yes. Carl lifted his chin and smiled. Matt shook his head. Something in me clicked shut with the quiet finality of a latch. I set the cookie down, wiped my hands on a dish towel and crossed to the shoe bench. The rubber sole squeaked a little as I slid my feet in. I bent close to Matt, close enough to smell the new soap Sophie liked to buy him. The one that promised ocean breeze to a boy who couldn't see the sea from our landlocked town. I laced my shoes and whispered to Matt, brush your teeth and go to bed early. The door closed. Maple Ridge doesn't have a station for people who want to leave themselves behind, but Columbus has a platform waiting. Interstate 71 unspooled under my headlights like a ribbon someone kept tugging from the future. Semi-trucks floated in and out of the dark with their orange clearance lights blinking like slow heartbeats. I drove with the window cracked, even though the January air burned. I needed the cold to keep me from mistaking resolve for fever. On the passenger seat sat a tote with flour dust on the canvas, and a Tupperware I hadn't opened. Rabbit cookies cooling into small moons no one had wanted.
The road signs rose and fell. Exits named after towns that sounded like cousins I'd never meet. Every few miles, the glass on my phone lit with messages. I turned it face down. The blue light strobed against the upholstery, a heartbeat I refused to answer. Columbus arrived as a smear of sodium lamps and parking lot emptiness. The sky over the city had that pre-morning color, paper before ink. I parked behind a brick building with a faded mural of a coffee cup exhaling steam. When I pulled the handle, the back door of the cafe opened with a sigh like someone relieved I'd finally arrived. Inside, the metal counters shone even in the dim, the way clean things do when they're waiting to be used. Laura was already there, hair up in a knot, sleeves shoved to her elbows. She held a steaming mug in both hands and frowned at me with her whole face, before the rest of her followed with a smile. "You look like a ghost that remembers the body," she said, and set the mug down long enough to hug me hard. Drink. The first sip hurt, in that way heat does when it has to thaw something that's been cold too long. I told her the short version, line breaks where the long version would have demanded pages. She didn't interrupt with pity or outrage. She watched my hands instead, the way a chef watches a flame. When I got to the part with Matt's palm, I set the mug down because it had started to shake. She placed her own hand over mine and looked not at my face but at my fingers. "Still smell like butter," she said softly, as if that were a diagnosis. "Stay. Work. Let them be loud somewhere you can shut the door." "What if I break the door?" I asked, half a joke, half a ledger entry of everything I'd already broken by staying too long where I wasn't seen. "You won't," she said. "But if you do, we'll fix the hinge." Her mouth tilted. "You and me." Out front, the first thin light found the window glass and set a pale stripe across the floor. I followed it with my eyes, and for a moment, the cafe window became a twin of the cabinet in my father's dining room. Another pains and reflections place that could trap a girl if she let it. But this glass looked back at me without judgment, promising a reflection of my choosing. Laura slid a stack of napkins across the table and clicked a pen. "Name," she said. "A real one, not something that apologizes for existing." "Ivy," I said, before I could talk myself out of it. "It grows where walls say no." She nodded once, sharp. "And flower." "It blooms when you give it time and heat." She drew a coil of ivy across the napkin and tucked the word flower beneath it, so the letters were partly tangled, partly free. On a second napkin, she tried a different hand-lettered F, and then another. She turned the napkin sideways and the ivy became a line, crawling up the frame of our window, claiming it without breaking it. Our first logo lived in pencil lines and coffee rings. It looked like the promise a child writes under covers with a flashlight. Small, stubborn, undeniable. My phone began its tantrum again. Buzz, buzz, buzz. A hive with my name inside it. I flipped it over. "Carl. Where are you? You owe Matt an apology for freaking him out." "Robert. Come home. You embarrass your sister when you carry on." "Sophie. We took him to the park so he wouldn't be sad. Try not to ruin it with your jealousy." 3 more messages stacked on top of those, then 4. They bloomed so fast, the screen looked like a time-lapse of weeds. I tapped open a single one from my father and read the first line. "You are not the kind of woman who leaves." The words were a key turning in an old lock I had been trained to call love. Without letting myself answer, I pressed the power button until the screen went black and the cafe exhaled. Silence has a temperature. This one was warm.
like a kitchen that has decided to trust you. Stay, Laura repeated, like a benediction this time. There's a cot in the office for now, and the morning shift needs hands. You don't have to decide your whole life before sunrise, just the next batch. She cocked her head toward the back, where the 3-bay sink gleamed like a small metallic altar. You want to baptize that phone first? Or your past? I laughed. One hard breath that rattled and then felt new. I have something better. I slid the tote from the chair and dug until my fingers found paper. An envelope creased and softened at the corners from too many times being the last word. I'd kept it because I was a good daughter. I kept it because part of me liked the weight. I slid it open with my nail. The letter inside was a sermon I had memorized long ago. I didn't read it. I fed it to the sink and struck a match. Flame is rude and honest. It took the corner first, and then the line of a sentence, and then the signature, which curled into itself like a fist relaxing for the first time. The metal sink held the heat and threw back a tremulous reflection. Me. Doubled and rippling, the orange licking the edges of my jaw. For a second, the window made another reflection, and in it I saw not the cabinet but a glass door with hours stenciled in white, and a bell that would ring for customers who weren't afraid to say my name. Laura stood beside me, arms crossed to keep from interfering in a ritual. What are you thinking? That I'm not leaving my family, I said, surprised by how steady the words felt when I stacked them in the air. I'm leaving the violence that got renamed love. We watched the last scrap turn to a lace of ash. I ran the faucet and chased the embers into steam. The mirror of the sink cleared. My face floated there, a study in absence and arrival. I wiped my cheek with the back of my wrist and left a chalky crescent of flour on my skin like a blessing. By the time the front door's deadbolt clicked and the open sign turned from sleep to alertness, the sky had inked in its lines. 2 early customers shuffled in, an old man in a cap who ordered black coffee as if it were medicine, and a woman in scrubs who yawned and smiled at the same time. Laura moved like she was a few minutes ahead of the room, turning on the grinder, checking the pastry case, handing me a towel without looking because she already knew where I was in the choreography. "Tell me a recipe," she said, testing me the way midwives test a newborn's lungs. "Any recipe." "Orange shortbread," I said. "Cut the butter small and work it fast, like you're apologizing to it. Zest like the sun is a deadline. Chill until the dough forgets your hands ever touched it. Slice, bake, wait." "Good," she said. "You still speak the language." The old man lifted his cup in a salute he might not have meant. The woman in scrubs told us her daughter was turning 7 and liked anything that looked like an animal. The sun found the ivy on the napkin and made it shine as if graphite could remember being a vine. Somewhere, my phone sat dark, the hive stunned into silence. Somewhere, a cabinet glass framed a doll with a perfect mouth and no throat. Laura asked, "Ready for your first bake shift?" I set my hand on the scale. Ready. The glass door swung open, the smell of butter and sugar spilling onto the street like a greeting. "We're here." Saturday in Columbus woke like a careful host, brisk, bright, a breeze that carried the bus bell and the distant bark of a dog. The row of storefronts on our little block blinked their signs alive one by one. A thrift shop, a watch repair, a barber whose striped pole spun like it still believed in parades. Our windows held a thin sheen of morning.
When I wiped it with a towel, my hand came away wet and sweet, like I'd swiped the breath off a cake. Inside the case, the first trays gleamed. Citrus shortbread cut into scallops, cardamom twists, and the rabbits. The rabbits always looking up as if ready for a question. I had rewritten their formula before dawn, subtracting sugar until the dough stopped shouting and started speaking. More orange zest, a whisper of salt. Butter cut cold, then worked fast, as if apology could be done with skill. When I lifted the glass, the scent rose and threaded the room, climbed the doorframe, slipped out onto the sidewalk, and people followed it as surely as if we'd run string around their fingers. Our first customers came as a pair, an elderly couple in coats older than our lease. He wore a cap with a county fair patch and ordered coffee as if he were clocking in. She pressed her fingertip against the case, not touching the glass, just pointing the way one points in a museum when the art refuses to be believed. "Look," she said. "They've got rabbits." She smiled at me like we were both remembering the same kitchen. "Less sweet," I told her, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "More orange. They don't need to be louder to be heard." "Neither do some people," she said, and took two. Laura moved through the room like a conductor who writes the music as she goes. Grinder on, register open, lids matched to cups by muscle memory. A teen with a camera slung across his chest slipped in backward, narrating to a phone held out in front of him. "Hidden gem. No, like, actually hidden," he said, backing up until he hit the chalkboard. He laughed, spun, and framed the pastry case so its reflection doubled in the window. When he panned across the room, his lens caught everything. The tray of rabbits, the way the ivy we'd taped in the corner climbed the trim, the small placard over the archway that read, "This premises is monitored by video. No louder than the rest, but clear as a bell if you bothered to listen." He asked if you could film me piping glaze. I said yes, my hands steady because they had something to hold. He closed on my knuckles, a tight shot that made them look like they belonged to someone who had never been asked to take the blame for the weather. "Tell the people your secret," he grinned. "Time," I said, "and heat. And not lying about either." He whooped, delighted, and flipped the camera back to his face. "You heard her. Truth in pastry form." Outside, a bus exhaled at the curb. A mother with a stroller came in and bought a croissant for herself and a single rabbit for her shy 3-year-old, who accepted it like a passport. The bell on the door sang, and the room gathered it into the hum of the grinder, the hiss of milk, the small conversation of people deciding what sweetness to allow themselves. My phone vibrated in my apron. The screen showed my father's name. I let it ring long enough to count the segments of light moving across the floorboards, then answered. "You're making a spectacle," he said without greeting. The line crackled with a distance that wasn't geographical. "Your sister says," "Dad," I said, "we open at 8. I can't do this now." "You embarrassed her last week," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "She had to take Matthew because you were..." "Working," I said, not raising my voice. "Feeding myself. Learning which things burn and which things rise." He made a noise that tried to be a laugh. "You've never been practical." Maybe I have been too practical for too long. Come home. This is home. I hung up because the coffee was ready, and the customer in the cap lifted his empty cup with a look I understood from every kitchen I'd ever worked in. The look that says, "Keep going." Laura cocked an eyebrow. I shook my head once. Enough. She slid another tray into the oven and leaned into the heat. We moved. Flour dusted our shoes like a blessing we picked up and carried without noticing. A delivery guy appeared with a rectangle box wrapped in brown paper and twine. No return address, just my name in a hand that prized legibility over flair. He set it on the counter. "Saw your door open," he said. "Figured you were ready." Inside, a bouquet. Ranunculus and small ivory roses, and sprigs of something green that looked like the word ivy written in cursive. A card, no envelope. For the best baker in town. My throat did that thing it does when a dear word arrives without warning, like a room opening where there was only a wall. "Anonymous?" Laura said. I nodded. She smiled the way a locksmith smiles at a stubborn door. Then the town knows what it's doing. The teen with the camera caught the flowers in a long shot, then tipped down to the corner where the security placard sat quietly at its post. "I love that," he said to his viewers. "Places that tell you up front they've got nothing to hide." He asked me to hold a rabbit up to the bouquet for scale. I did. And for a moment, the porcelain face in my memory, the doll behind my father's glass, flickered and dissolved. The only glass that mattered now was the kind that invited people in and reflected them back as customers, not judges. I boxed a dozen for the woman with the stroller and added a 13th, smaller, for the little girl, who gasped like I'd performed a trick. "It's not a secret," I told her. "It's practice." Between orders, I wrote a sentence on the chalkboard in the corner, because the room needed a sentence the way a cake needs salt. Sweetness doesn't cover the real aroma. Truth is the first to evaporate. A few customers read it out loud and nodded to themselves like they'd just remembered something they were afraid they'd forget. By 10, the case had thinned, and the room had filled with the kind of talking that only happens when people feel safe wasting time. Someone played a song on their phone, and someone else harmonized under their breath. The camera kid promised to tag us. The couple in the coats bought 2 more rabbits, for the road, and for later. Laura pressed her palm to the oven door and listened like a doctor. "Another 3 minutes," she pronounced. We were a body with a working heart. The phone in my apron trembled again, not with a call this time, but with the small, insistent buzz of an incoming notification. I wiped my hands, slid the screen free, and felt the sudden narrowing of sound you get when your name is read out loud in a room that shouldn't know it. A banner climbed up from the bottom of the glass, white on black, simple as a doorbell. "Carl Bennett is at the door." He didn't enter like a customer, he slid in as if he owned the air. The doorbell tried its best to make him ordinary, but even the sound ducked when Carl crossed the threshold. Noon light threw his shadow across the tile, long and sure of itself. The line of customers parted instinctively, not because he said, "Excuse me," but because some bodies learn to make space for storms. The vlogger kid lowered his camera a fraction, then lifted it again, the lens widening as if the room had suddenly grown teeth. He stopped at the counter and tapped 2 fingers against the glass case. Once, twice. A metronome set to my pulse. "So this is what you left for," he said, casual like a bruised peach. "An audience, and an apron." Laura stepped out from the espresso machine with the calm of a lifeguard who has seen this shore before. "If you're ordering, the menu's on the wall," she said. "If you're here for anything else, we can talk outside." "I'm here about my son," Carl announced to the room, volume turned just enough to be heard 3 tables over. Heads lifted the way heads do in churches when the name of God is spoken. "His mother walked out." He tilted his head toward me. "Tell them, Ellen. Tell them why your boy spent last night asking where you went." The grinder's hum died, and in the pocket of quiet, The room's glass seemed to grow eyes. The door, the pastry case, the wide front window that reflected our shapes back to us like the truth you see only when you can't look away. Behind Carl's shoulder, the small sign above the arch said, "This premises is monitored by video." It did not blink. It did not blush. I set a tray of cooling shortbread on the rack and took the towel from my shoulder. "We're not doing this here," I said. My voice surprised me by not breaking. It sounded like a line drawn with a ruler. Carl smiled without warmth. "We're doing it wherever you pretend to be the victim." He turned to include the line in our conversation. "She abandoned her own child." A woman in scrubs glanced from me to Laura, then down at her coffee like she could make the foam swallow the taste of the moment. The elderly couple from earlier stood very still, hands around paper cups, as if heat could make them invisible. By the door, the vlogger shifted his stance and lifted the camera. Not stealthy, just young, convinced that light is what fixes things. "Outside," Laura repeated, stepping between Carl and the register, not touching him, simply occupying the space a mistake would need. "Now." He leaned forward until I could see the flecks of sawdust or maybe sugar on his coat sleeve. He set his palm on the glass and pressed. The pastry case shivered. A stack of cups jittered and one fell, rolling in a wobble that made the note of its plastic rattle somehow obscene. Several phones came up in a ripple. 3, then 5, then more. Small rectangular witnesses waking at once. The security camera in the corner stared with its usual unblinking mercy. "You're scaring my customers," I said. Though the truth was, I was afraid only for the glass. "I'm telling them a story," he said. "The truth." He tapped the case again, harder. "You don't get to walk away from being a mother and bake it into something palatable." "A story becomes the truth when the teller is the only one allowed to speak," I said, not looking away. My hands were steady on the towel, on the steel, on the air. "Not here," he smirked. "What? Because you put up a camera? You think anyone cares?" Behind him, the vlogger whispered to his feed, "We're at Ivy and Flower. Things are escalating." A woman near the window raised her phone higher, then lower, then steadied it at chest level like a heart monitor. By the condiments, a man I hadn't seen before, a plain jacket, no logo, forgettable as a comma, stood very still with his phone at his side, pointed outward, the lens a quiet coin. The anonymous customer. He didn't blink either. Carl's voice dropped until it was a thread pulled taut. He leaned in so his breath fogged the glass, and the fog became another layer of mirror, me hovering in it like a question. "Nobody will believe you," he said, soft, intimate, vile. "They never have." I angled my face so my words went to him and to the glass, and to the camera, and to the person I refused to be again. "Glass has eyes, Carl." Silence shivered. It wasn't the kind of line that wins an argument. It was the kind that finds a chair and sits down to wait. Laura exhaled, slow. "You're done," she told him. A verdict, not a request. Two men near the door shifted their weight in the way men do when the room asks them if they are good. Carl sensed the physics turning. He lifted his hand off the case and left a print I didn't bother to wipe. For a beat, he looked like every boy who had ever been told the game was over while he was still having fun. And then he pasted on his public face and turned to the closest phone. "See," he said, with an almost laugh. "Joke over. She's sensitive." He backed toward the door, hip checking the bell so it chirped a nervous goodbye.
"Enjoy your pastries!" he tossed, not quite loud enough to be a hero, and went out into the cold as if the air owed him room. The room held its breath a second longer, then remembered how to live. Someone coughed. Someone else said, "Wow," in a tone that hoped we could all pretend this had been a scene in a pleasant drama about other people. The vlogger lowered his camera and gave me a small nod that meant I saw. The anonymous man slipped his phone into his pocket and studied the flowers on the counter like they were a language he'd just learned to read. "Back to it," Laura said gently, and the grinder obeyed as if it had been waiting for permission. I wiped the glass only where his handprint smudged the light and left the rest as it was. The case kept our reflection. Me, the ivy sketch taped in the corner, trays that shone because they were honest about their ingredients. My apron buzzed. I took the phone out with fingers that didn't shake. A message had landed in the seconds since Carl had pushed open the door. It was from Sophie. A photo filled the screen. Matt on her lap, his head turned toward her shoulder, her mouth tilted into an angle that could be read as tender by anyone who didn't know she loved cameras more than children. The caption sat under it, small and tidy and bright as a sticker you place over a bruise to pretend it's decoration. "He's fine." Columbus night was chilly. I adjusted the butter ratio. -10 grams, plus orange zest. When the oven pinged, I knew I had found my voice. No need to shout. Dawn didn't so much arrive as condense, beating across the windows in a fine breath that smelled of frost and bus exhaust. Inside ivy and flower, the mixers sat like obedient animals waiting for a command. I scribbled in my recipe notebook, weights, timings, asterisks next to "don't overwork." The citrus oil stained my cuticles a faint gold. I zested as if I were shaving regret into ribbons I could finally throw away. Laura unlocked the front, flipped the sign, and slid a mug toward me. "Less sugar?" she asked, eyeing the scale. "More orange," I said. "Let the butter speak instead of scream." She nodded at the little black dome in the corner. "And let the camera do some of the talking, too." I opened a fresh page in a different notebook, the one that wasn't about pastry. Checklist. I wrote the word in block letters so it couldn't pretend to be shy. Under it, screenshot. Sophie's text from yesterday, caption and timestamp. Save the anonymous bouquet card. Envelope, twine, photograph both. Clip of Carl's hand on the pastry case. Time code 12:16 p.m. Audio of abandoned and truth. Register receipt batch from opening day. Establish pattern of normal business. Inventory delivery. Signed by driver. Name on invoice. I drew squares beside each line and checked the first two immediately. The small sound of my pen making a box felt like a notch on a doorframe where a child measures how they've grown. Our elderly couple returned, coat steaming a little from the cold. He ordered the usual, whatever it is, and she asked for the rabbits that don't apologize. I boxed them and pretended not to notice when her hand brushed mine, in that deliberate way old women have of saying, "We know. We've always known." The vlogger pushed in backward again, winter air following him in a clumsy wave. "Back at the spot," he announced, then lowered his voice like a conspirator. "Is it cool if I grab 10 seconds of your security cam? For context in the review, like to show the vibe? I'll blur faces and stuff." I looked at Laura. She shrugged. "Send the clip before you post so we can make sure no one's visible," I told him. He crossed his heart with a grin and aimed his phone at the monitor, catching the little grid that showed door, counter, ovens. Our ordinary angles, our honest light.
He lingered on the timestamp like it was a provenance stamp on art. "This place is legit," he told his audience. "It knows when it is." I returned to the checklist. The phone on the prep table buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I saw what happened yesterday. If you need my footage, I have it." No name. Just the small, brave period at the end of the sentence. I breathed in, out. The dough under my palm softened. The room leaned closer, as if heat had turned it curious. Laura watched me tape the bouquet card into a sleeve and label it with today's date. "No more reacting," she said. "We build. Brick by careful brick. You don't have to win by being the loudest." "Truth is like yeast," I said, surprising myself with the way the sentence rose. "It isn't noisy, but it will lift the dough." She smiled. "Put that on the wall." Customers came and went, stroller wheels ticking at the threshold, boots leaving a constellation of thawing snow. I adjusted bakes by seconds, rotated trays with the grace of someone inviting one more chair to a crowded table. Between orders, Laura called a family law attorney she trusted in Columbus, speaker off, voice steady. "Consult only," she said when she hung up. "We go in prepared, or we don't go." I cued the security feed on the back monitor and scrolled to the part where the bell jittered under Carl's shoulder. The sound of the room before the slam was a living thing. The grinder, the hiss, the clatter. Life doing its best impression of normal. Then his palm hit the glass and the case shivered, a ripple that ran through the shelf and up the reflection, until my own face flickered there, layered over rows of rabbits with their chocolate eyes. In the warped pain, I looked like a woman underwater holding her breath. I paused the frame, stepped closer, and saw myself steady, chin level, jaw quiet, eyes not blinking. Silence has a spine, I thought. It stands up when you stop apologizing for it. Laura came to stand beside me. We didn't talk. We watched the moment again. Press, tremor, ripple. My shoulders squaring by a fraction. His smirk, attempting to colonize the room and failing on the security feed because cameras are lousy at recording charisma and very good at catching hands where they don't belong. I saved 3 stills. His palm on glass, the sign in frame. My face, reflected, not flinching. I printed them to a cheap laser that turned the image into newsprint ghosts and filed them into a folder I labeled with a date and nothing else. The drawer shut with a sound that felt like a declaration. Mid-morning, the couple finished their coffee and left, as if they were leaving church, slow, grateful, careful with the door. The vlogger returned a wave and promised to DM the clip. A rush of 9-to-5ers took the last of the twists, and I slid another tray in, the oven swallowing it with a quiet yes. Between rushes, I wrote more boxes. Bank statements. Flag cash withdrawals that match Sophie's posts. Photos of the bouquet in situ. Establish anonymous goodwill before any smear. Copy of yesterday's order log. Steady transactions not equal to chaos. Document the anonymous message offering footage. Ask Laura to sign a simple memo stating observations of Carl's behavior. Date, time, place. I checked 3 more boxes and felt the day realign itself around a different kind of recipe. At the sink, steam plumed against the window and wrote its brief invisible letters on the glass. I wiped them away with the heel of my hand, and in the clean pane I saw a double exposure. The cabinet of my father's house and our front door. The doll's glass eyes and the black dome of our camera. the past that wanted me to live inside it, and the present that would lend me light without charging interest. "Lawyer set," Laura said, joining me at the counter with a slip of paper. "Consult on Thursday." She said to bring documentation, not stories. I tapped the folder. "I have documentation." "And you have a story," she said, eyes kind. "But save that for when it's your choice to tell it." I set another sheet of shortbread on the rack. The scent of orange rose, frank and clean, not pleading for attention but getting it anyway. A child at the counter tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "It smells like when the sun is in the kitchen." She laughed and bought two. Noon crept in by degrees. The city noise thickened, and the glass door learned the names of more hands. I moved like a metronome set to awake, between pulls and pours and the exacting mercy of timers. I opened the camera file one more time and froze the frame where my face ghosted the glass. I didn't need to hear him say nobody will believe you again. The picture rebutted him better than a recording ever could. There I was, reflected in the case I had stocked myself, surrounded by work I refused to deny. Quiet didn't mean small. It meant chosen. The oven pinged. The note threaded the room and landed square in my chest, where it joined the stubborn beat that had carried me down the interstate and into a life that required both hands. I lifted the tray, rotated, set, timed, as if motion could keep the ache from hardening into something brittle. Outside, a bus sighed. Inside, a receipt printer chirped, promising a small proof of exchange. I washed my hands and reopened the checklist. Added one more box without thinking. Breath. Take one. Take another. Keep taking them. I colored it in with the blunt end of the pen. When the lull finally came, a minute, maybe two, a foothold in the middle of a climb, I reached for my phone to photograph a cooling sheet and saw the red badge freckle the mail icon. The subject line was plain enough to be a slap. Meeting request. I tapped it open and read it twice to be sure the words stayed in the order they'd landed. The tone was neutral, the sentences short, the kind that aimed to make information harmless by stripping it of adjectives. Email notification. Matt's elementary school invites parents to meet with the school counselor. Laura handed me a beat-up cardboard box from my mother's house. "I think this belongs to you." The paper had yellowed, the ink blurred like rain that had already happened. The storm had been patient all afternoon and finally let go at dusk. A steady, curtain-fine rain that stitched Maple Ridge to Columbus with silver thread. In my rented apartment, the heat knocked in the pipes, a hollow sound, like a spoon tapping an empty jar. We set the box on the small dining table, between a thrifted lamp and the plant I kept forgetting to water. Damp crept through the cardboard. When I slit the tape, a sour library smell breathed out. Basements and Sunday dresses, and the kind of secrets that think dust is armor. Inside, manila envelopes, a rubber-banded stack of receipts, a handful of postcards that had never been mailed. Laura pulled 2 tea mugs close and sat, shoulders squared the way she does when she's both friend and foreman. "Take your time," she said. "We're not on anyone's clock tonight." I lifted the first envelope. Out slid bank transfer slips stamped with dates from years I could taste but barely name. My mother's handwriting looped across the memo lines in the careful cursive she used for checks and apologies. Tuition, Sophie, fall. Tuition, Sophie, spring. The numbers were neat.
The kind of sums you make by skipping lunches and stretching shoes and telling a child the pretty dress can wait. There was a note taped to one bundle, the tape brittle and amber. "Don't tell your father. He says his side will cover it." I heard her voice in my head as clearly as the heat in the pipes, a gentle tone that turned sacrifice into routine, as if love could be measured in how little you asked in return. My stomach pulled tight. The room shrank to a postage stamp with my mother's name on it. I laid the slips out by semester, like a timeline I had been too obedient to draw. Laura leaned in but didn't touch. "These," she said, tapping a finger near "not on," "are why your sister flew and you were told you didn't have wings." The lightning stitched the sky above the alley, and for an instant, my mother's reflection hovered in the glass of the dark window. Short hair, sensible blouse, the half-smile of someone who has mastered the art of not needing. I swallowed and pulled out another envelope. A handwritten letter, the kind you fold before you let yourself cry. She had written to a bursar, "Please accept this payment. The remaining will come by the end of the month. Thank you for your patience." Beneath, her signature. The M looped, the S a small river. I needed to be sure. I called my aunt, the one who had kept a drawer full of church fans and death notices, a woman whose memory organized itself in shoeboxes. She answered on the second ring, with a hello that could have been a question or a blessing. I read a line. She finished it from memory. "Your mother," she said, "paid what your father promised. He liked to boast, she liked to budget. He let people believe. She let you girls eat." "Did he know?" I asked. "He knew the version that made him generous," she said, softened and dry. "Baby, some men prefer the silhouette of a thing to its bones." Rain tapped the sill. I felt something old and obedient lift and look around for the first time. We hung up. I laid my mother's signature beside one of my own, both on white scraps torn from grocery lists. The resemblance was a small, private bell. Laura reached for my hand. "Say it," she urged, not unkindly. "Say the sentence that lets the floor stop tilting." I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. When I let the words out, the room's angles corrected. "So fairness was paid for once. By my mother's money." The syllables didn't accuse her. They prosecuted a myth. I stared at the receipts until they stopped being paper and turned into weight. Sophie's bright future, packaged in glossy social posts, had a ledger behind it. Overdrafts and layaway and a woman folding 100 small humiliations into grace. The story I had been fed. Our father, the visionary, Sophie, the prodigy, me, the shadow, had been underwritten by a person who wrote checks in quiet ink. "Who paid the bill for your halo?" I whispered to the room that had always preferred her light. Laura slid a legal pad toward me. We photocopied each slip with tonight's date written faintly in pencil on the back. We photographed the note about my father, then photographed the photographs because sometimes you have to make a fortress of redundancy. I tucked the originals into a clear sleeve and labeled it with a single word: tuition. When I looked up, Laura had opened the window an inch to let the damp air in. "You don't owe the past silence," she said. "You owe it accuracy." I laughed, a small, shocked sound, and nodded. Accuracy would have to learn to live alongside love. Both could fit if they took turns. The lamp hummed. Rain slowed to a whisper. I gathered the letters back into the box. Not as contraband,
but as evidence that goodness sometimes wears the wrong name in family stories. I imagined bringing the folder into a courtroom one day and laying it on a table like a loaf still warm from the oven. Here, see how it was made? See what it cost? My phone buzzed on the edge of the table, the screen bright as a dare. A message slid into focus. Sophie's contact photo polished to a sheen. The text was chirpy and precise, punctuation like pearls. This Sunday we're taking Matt to church. Don't come and make trouble. The room had a pale green rug and a shelf of toys. The counselor said, "Matt says he misses you most at lunchtime." The window let in a winter light that made everything look slightly kind, like a teacher grading in pencil instead of red. A low table held bins of wooden blocks, plastic animals, a few hand puppets with their smiles stitched on permanently. My chair was small enough that my knees edged the underside. It made me remember the particular humility of being 5 and needing permission to speak. "I'm Amelia Brooks," the counselor said, offering a gentle handshake. Her office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and crayons. On a side table, a sand tray waited with 2 little rakes crossed like chopsticks. "Mrs. Harris, thank you for coming. I know transitions are hard." "Thank you for seeing me," I said. The words were careful, a stack aligned to the edge of the desk. She folded into her seat with the practiced attention of someone who does not rush small fires. "At lunch," she repeated, "Matt tends to go quiet. He picks at his fruit cup and stares at the door. That's when he tells me he misses you." The sentence loosened a knot behind my breastbone. Not relief and not pain exactly, but a recognition that ache can be mapped. I pressed my palms together to keep from wringing them. "He told you that?" "He did," she said, and then chose her next words with tweezers. "There are other things he repeats. Phrases that sound older than he is." I waited. "My mom is useless," she said softly. Exactly like that. He says it in the same cadence each time, like a line he's learned. It's not a phrase I typically hear from a 5-year-old. The rug's fibers blurred for a second. I nodded once to keep a flood from mistaking me for a harbor. "That's not his language." "No," she agreed. "When a child borrows an adult's voice, his heart is whispering in its own." She let the sentence rest between us, not as philosophy, but as a simple diagnosis. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to describe the behavior and support him. And you. I looked at the shelf of puppets. The fox tilted its head like it knew too much. "I want to document this properly," I said, hearing my lawyer's future questions, dates, times, direct quotes. "Would you be willing to note today's observations? And, if appropriate, provide a letter summarizing what you've seen over time?" Ms. Brooks nodded. "I can write a contemporaneous summary of our meeting and, with administration's okay, a general statement about language patterns and affect. I won't make custody recommendations. That's outside our scope. But I can describe what I witness at school." "Thank you," I said. The gratitude tasted like air after a held breath. She flipped a legal pad open, dated the corner, and wrote small, neat lines as we spoke. His teacher, Ms. Patel, also reported that when he answers questions in class, he glances over his shoulder. It's subtle but consistent. Like he's waiting for approval. Exactly. It's as if he expects a cue from someone behind him. I pictured it. my son's head turning a fraction, the borrowed words arriving just ahead of his own. A small boy in a borrowed coat, sleeves dragging. Has he seemed frightened? Not frightened, she said, weighing the word. More vigilant, hyper-attuned to adult reactions. He also asked me last week, is it okay if I like my mom's cookies again? The sentence grazed me like a blade dipped in honey. He said that? She nodded. We talked about feelings not being wrong answers. We sat with that for a moment, the room offering its quiet in measured spoonfuls. Outside, a bell rang faintly, dismissal for another grade. Ms. Brooks clicked her pen closed. My recommendations for now are modest. Regular check-ins with me, a play-based group to normalize expression, and, if you're comfortable, a referral list for child therapists in town. Also, and I say this gently, avoid disputes in front of him. Even a closed door leaks. I understand, I said. I thought of glass, and how it remembers fingerprints long after hands leave. Thank you for saying it plain. She slid a printed permission form across the desk. I signed. My name looked steadier than I felt. I'll email you a summary of today's meeting by the end of day, she said. If anything urgent arises, I'll call. One more question, I said. When he says those older phrases, does his face change? She hesitated, then answered with the precision of someone who knows adjectives can go to court. His jaw tightened slightly. And she searched the air for an image that didn't injure. He keeps looking past me, just to the right. Like there's an audience. Like there's a prompter, she said. She walked me down the hall. Student artwork lined the walls. Snowmen with too many buttons, blunt sunflowers, a paper chain counting down to spring. At the end of the corridor, a small boy in boots tried to hopscotch alone, his tongue between his teeth in concentration. The world was full of children rehearsing courage. At her door, Miss Brooks touched the frame the way some people touch a pew. You're showing up, she said. That matters more than you think. I stepped into the pale afternoon. The air felt thin and bright, like it had been bleached and wrung out to dry. I drew my coat tighter and reached for my phone to add the meeting to my documentation. Date, time, exact quotes, the kinds of details that knit a safety net. The screen vibrated in my hand, the notification already scrolling up before I could breathe it back down. The phone buzzed. Carl sent a court summons, seeking temporary custody on the grounds of the mother abandoned the home. The attorney flipped through statements like a chef weighing flour. These hotel rewards points are interesting. I knew at once the perfume I'd smelled wasn't just air. Morgan Hale's office was bright in a deliberate way. Whiteboard timeline taped with blue painter's tape, a printer purring, a ficus that looked like it had tenure. Her paralegal, Danny, set a banker's box on the credenza and opened my folder with the reverence of a recipe card you don't want to smudge. Morgan drew a line across the board. Home, bakery incident, school counselor, financials. She capped the marker, sat, and slid the most recent credit card statement between us. Here, she said, tapping a cluster of charges. Downtown Marriott 2 nights, spa add-on. Rewards posted to Carl's loyalty number. She rotated her laptop so I could see Sophie's Instagram story, screen recorded from last week. A clink of glasses, a city view window I recognized. Morgan paused the video at the reflection in the glass. Carl's shoulder, unmistakable as a habit. Story timestamp, Friday, 9:43 p.m. Hotel Folio shows room service at 9:51. Same city, same night. Danny pulled a zip drive from a small plastic bag. You said your phone auto-saves family media to your cloud. We exported a backup. She plugged it in. Not all platforms keep metadata, but Sophie's cross-post to her public album still has EXIF. GPS puts her within 100 feet of the Marriott South Tower. She zoomed a map, the pin blooming like a truth you can't talk over. The air thinned. Pieces that had been rumors in my body sorted themselves into rows. A bar receipt backing into a caption about self-care. Loyalty points grafted onto a narrative about sacrifice. My son on her lap in a photograph that pretended to be Mercy. Morgan flipped to the next page. Same card. Family eatery at noon, the day you launched. Then the hotel bar again at night. Your joint account means disclosure isn't optional. I nodded, steadying my breath on the edge of the table. He told anyone who'd listen he was bleeding for the family. A halo bought with points still leaves a bill, Morgan said, dry as a ledger. She rifled through my evidence. The bakery video stills, Carl's palm on the case, the camera sign in frame, my face reflected and unflinching. My mother's tuition slips, labeled and sleeved. Miss Brooks's same-day summary about phrases too old for a 5-year-old's mouth. We're not painting character, she said, arranging everything into a stack that made a kind of music. We're proving conduct. Danny typed as Morgan dictated a summary letter. Exhibits A through F with dates, sources, and hash values for the video files. A footnote noting that the vlogger's review captured the security placard and the interior camera's field of view. She printed, clipped, and slid the packet to me. Read for accuracy, not for revenge. I'll request the hotel's camera logs once we file. On the whiteboard, Morgan marked next steps like beats in a score. Subpoena bank records, arrow. Contact anonymous witness who offered footage, arrow. Preserve school records. We don't need to shout, she said, capping the marker with a soft click. We need tempo. Wind worried the office window. I signed where she'd stickered flags, each signature a small metronome tick. The story I had braced myself to beg was now a pile that could stand without me holding it up. I closed the folder and felt the table stop tilting. My phone lit on silent. A new banner climbed the glass, factual as a date stamp. Email from the court. First hearing set for next Thursday. Sophie posts, family first. Family court doesn't look like the movies. The benches are hard. There's no soundtrack. Just paper rustling and people looking at each other like mirrors. The hallway smelled like coffee that had given up. Fluorescent lights hummed a note that wasn't quite a pitch, just a persistence. I stood with Morgan by a window that offered nothing but our reflections in the morning gray. Me in a dark dress, hands quiet. Morgan with her legal pad tiled in neat squares. Across the hall, Carl adjusted his tie until the knot looked like a clenched jaw. Sophie hovered at his shoulder in a pale blouse that made her look breakable on purpose. We filed in with the others. The judge's nameplate read Whitaker, square, plain, unsurprised. When the clerk called our case, the room rearranged around our voices. Carl's attorney stood first and sketched a narrative in tidy strokes. Mother abandoned the marital home. Child needs stability. Father has provided continuity. Mother's new venture is unpredictable. The words landed like thumbtacks, small, sharp, meant to hold a poster that didn't belong to me. Morgan rose without flourish. She offered the court a packet as if she were handing over a recipe. Ingredients, measures, proof of heat. Video from my client's place of business, she said. documenting Mr. Bennett's conduct on premises open to the public. Signage visible in frame. A contemporaneous summary from the school counselor noting language not typical for a child of 5. Financial exhibits establishing discretionary hotel and bar spending, correlated with Ms. Miller's social postings. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She placed each fact on the record like a stone in a path. The judge flipped through the pages, pausing on the still image of Carl's hand pressed to the pastry case. He glanced at the caption under the security placard, then at Morgan, then at Carl. "I'll admit these for now," he said. "We'll address weight later." He drew a short line on his legal pad, then looked up. "In the interim, I'm ordering a standard schedule. Alternating weekends, midweek dinner, no unilateral changes. Both parties will refrain from disparaging the other in the child's presence or online. Do you understand?" "I do," I said. Carl's attorney said, "We do." The bailiff announced the next case, and we stood. As the room emptied, our orbit drew us close in the aisle. Sophie leaned in, her perfume doing its best to sound like virtue. "Even with good pastries," she breathed, "you still swallow my spotlight." "Light isn't a meal," I said. "It's the thing that shows the dust." For a second, her face forgot its lines. Then she smoothed them back on. In the corridor, Morgan touched my sleeve. "We did what we came to do," she said. "Courts don't need you to be right today. They need you to be patient until the truth shows up." I nodded. The window glass threw us back at ourselves again. 4 figures now. Me, Morgan, the version of me who had kept quiet, the one who had learned how to speak. We walked the long hall past other families practicing the art of looking composed in public. Each door we passed carried a number and a silence. Outside, the sky was a sheet of hammered pewter. In the lot, cars stuttered awake, one ignition after another. Morgan peeled off toward her sedan. I unlocked mine and rested my forehead against the cool rim of the steering wheel, letting the morning lift off me in layers. My phone was face down in the passenger seat, its black screen a tiny, faithful mirror. It buzzed once, then again. I flipped it over. A message had arrived without a name, just a small icon and a file attachment icon pulsing. Video.mov. I tapped. The first frame was a shakily framed kitchen I recognized too well. The old stove, the fruit bowl dented at the rim, the light that always made the room look tired. Adult voices collided, sharp, overlapping, the kind of fight that tries to eat the oxygen. And close to the mic, a child's breath, ragged with trying not to be heard. As soon as I got to the parking lot, I received an anonymous video file, a shaky image of an old kitchen, the sounds of adults arguing, and a child's breathing very close to the mic. I hit play. The screen shook. Sophie's voice was yelling. Carl's answered. And then, Matt's thin breath. "I miss Mom." Rain stitched the window with silver threads, and the laptop threw a square of cold light onto the glass, turning it into yet another mirror that refused to flatter. The video lurched. Our old kitchen, the dented fruit bowl, the cabinet hinge I'd never managed to fix. Sophie's voice came first, sharp as a broken ornament. "She'll never get him back," she snapped. Carl shot back, lower, needling, the cadence of a man who thinks volume is proof. Pots rattled, a chair leg scraped, and close to the mic, so close I could feel his breath fog the phone's tiny lens, Matt whispered, I want Mom.
Laura made a sound I'd only ever heard in churches and delivery rooms. A soft keen that apologized for existing. She pressed the heel of her hand to her mouth and sat down without looking for a chair. I paused, rewound. Let the words come again. I want Mom. They were unpolished, unstagey, an arrow tipped with milk teeth. The room seemed to lean on them. Morgan joined by video call, her face a clean geometry in a smaller rectangle. Don't send it anywhere yet, she said. Let me pull the file down raw. I airdropped it. She went quiet, working. While she parsed the bones of it, we watched once more. Sophie circling, Carl cornering. The choreography of adults who need a child to be an audience. A glass clinked. Sophie laughed without humor. Do you hear me, Carl? She will not win. He's fine here. Laura's shoulders shook. He did what none of us dared, she said. Tears running clean lines down flour-dry cheeks. He kept the truth. Morgan's voice returned, tight with focus. EXIF is intact. The phone's clock matches the carrier records. Recorded 12 days ago, 7:18 p.m. GPS puts it in your old kitchen, latitude and longitude within 5 meters. Audio peaks line up with movement, no signs of edit splices. The file hash is noted. I'll generate a chain of custody memo and a declaration for whoever delivered it. Anonymous, I said. It came from a number I don't know. Then we preserve the anonymity for now and authenticate the artifact, not the courier, Morgan replied. What matters is that the child's spontaneous utterance is captured contemporaneously with conflict. That's probative. We don't need to shout. We need rhythm. We'll file a supplemental exhibit tonight. I let the clip run with the sound low, not because I couldn't bear it, but because I could. Each ordinary detail strengthened it. The hum of the old fridge, the tick of the clock I'd always meant to replace, the tiny intake of Matt's breath before courage made a sound. Children don't lie. They just learn silence from adults. My reflection in the window nodded back as if the glass finally agreed. Laura wiped her face with the cuff of her sweater and pulled a notepad from her bag. Tag the exact timestamp where he says it, she said, practical as ever. Print a transcript. Back up the raw to 2 drives and your cloud. Put one off-site. She looked up at me, eyes bright. And text Miss Brooks. She needs to know we heard him. Morgan emailed a draft. Exhibit G, anonymous video, with metadata table, hash values, and a 1-paragraph declaration attesting to receipt. Sign and return, she said. I'll attach Miss Brooks's earlier note and the bakery footage index. Monday is soon. Outside, the rain softened to a hush, the kind that makes a city feel like a bedroom. I replayed the last 5 seconds again, the whisper threading the noise like a stitch that would not come out. He wants me, I said. Not to ask permission, but to name the fact that had been standing in the doorway all along. The laptop's light trembled in the glass and steadied. Laura reached across the table and took my hand. We didn't pretend this was triumph. It was a door, unlocking from the inside. My inbox pinged. A new subject line settled in like a gavel finding wood. Plain and mercilessly specific. Email from the court. The final hearing is set for Monday morning. The video is accepted for review. Columbus, Monday morning. Rain showers. Cars stacked in long rows. I carried a small USB, like a metal heart that knew the beat. Family court felt colder than last time. White light,
hard echoes, every cough magnified. Carl's attorney moved first. The clip was manufactured, prompted, inadmissible. Morgan didn't raise her voice. She offered the chain of custody, the file hash, the timestamp, the GPS. She named the vlogger who'd captured our in-store camera sign and Ms. Brooks, who had documented Matt's borrowed phrases. Justice doesn't need a microphone. It only needs the truth to turn on. The screen brightened. For a breath, the room watched its own reflection. Then our old kitchen swam into view, shaky and ordinary. Sophie's voice snapped. "Stop recording!" Carl's growl followed, needling, nearer. And then, thin and steady as a stitch, Matt. "I miss Mom." Chairs creaked. Someone swallowed too loudly. The judge's gavel tapped. Once. Twice. Sophie's composure cracked. Tears slicked through the powder. Carl surged up, palms slamming the table, an ugly thud. The courtroom camera caught the strike, the bailiff's warning, the judge's eyes narrowing like a shutter. The judge ordered a 15-minute recess to deliberate. Morgan looked at me. We just flipped the board. When the judge returned, no one breathed. I saw light slant through the window and settle on my shoulder, and it wasn't cold anymore. Judge Whittaker sat, the room reassembling itself around the bench like metal filings to a magnet. Papers were squared, microphones nudged, a final shiver of coughs tucked away. His gaze moved from Morgan to Carl's counsel and then to me, not hunting, just weighing. "This court finds," he began, voice flat as a gavel at rest, "that primary physical custody of the minor child Matthew Harris is awarded to his mother, Ellen Harris. Father shall have parenting time under supervision as arranged through the center, with discretion to expand upon a showing of compliance and progress." The words landed like bricks I could finally stand on. I didn't cry. My hands trembled instead, a small storm contained at my wrists. Morgan let out the breath I hadn't noticed she'd been holding, and touched the corner of the table. Once, as if to confirm it was real. Carl's jaw worked, the old knot tightening, loosening, tightening again. Sophie's composure snapped audible as a thread. "She stole my life!" she shouted, lurching to her feet. The bailiff stepped forward with a calm hand and the judge lifted one brow, a minimal reprimand that carried the weight of oak. "Ms. Miller, sit down," he said. The room's oxygen returned in increments. Whittaker turned another page. "Further, the child shall engage in therapeutic services recommended by the school counselor or a licensed clinician. This court expects the adults to support that process. What Matthew needs is not a wall of silence, but help, learning that his voice is safe." The line found me like a blessing spoken without perfume. I thought of the sand tray in Ms. Brooks's office, the two little rakes crossing and uncrossing their paths, and I imagined my son tracing his own without glancing over his shoulder. The judge added standard orders. No disparagement, no weaponizing social media, no filming the child for litigation theater. Morgan nodded, punctuating each term with a note. Across the aisle, Carl's attorney swallowed his arguments like pills taken too late to matter. We were dismissed. Our chairs scraped in unison, the room shrugging off the case and reaching for the next. In the aisle, Sophie's eyes slid over me, searching for the version that would apologize for winning. I kept my face still. Light touched the varnish of the pews and struck a small flare on the floor. A bright leaf of afternoon that made me think, unexpectedly,
of ivy. How it finds a seam in a wall and decides that's enough to live. Out in the corridor, the hum turned human again, heels on tile, elevator chimes, a child somewhere practicing laughter. We pushed through the doors and into a noon that had finally chosen a color. Microphones bloomed like metal flowers. Someone called my name. Another voice asked for a statement, for the family audience at home. Morgan angled her shoulder to give me a pocket of air. A reporter with a rain slicker and calm eyes stepped close, recorder poised. "Miss Harris, do you have anything you want to say to Sophie?" The question hovered, generous and sharp at once. I could feel the old cabinet glass at my back, the porcelain faces, the blue ribbon that had never frayed. I could feel the weight of a small boy's whisper threading a noisy room. I looked past the cameras to somewhere my son might be standing later. Somewhere a window might be throwing a square of light onto a table that would hold only what we chose to keep. Keep the porcelain doll. I choose the real child. Victory doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with quiet and shadows that haven't learned how to leave. The radio murmured from the kitchen shelf, tinny and earnest. A local host recapping the custody ruling. A legal expert explaining why a child's unprompted whisper can outweigh 1,000 polished statements. Outside, drizzle stitched the alley. Inside, the apartment held its breath like a chapel after the hymn. The ivy on the window frame had found another seam in the paint and claimed it, leaf by patient leaf. Laura washed 2 mugs and left them upside down to dry. "I'll lock up downstairs," she said, touching my shoulder with a glance that meant, "You are allowed to sit." When the door clicked, the quiet rearranged itself around a new envelope on the table. Cream paper. My name in a hand I knew from report cards and permission slips. I slid a finger under the flap. "Ellen, I was wrong. Your mother understood before I did. Forgive me if you can." There was more. Crooked sentences searching for the kind of humility that doesn't know its lines yet. He wrote about the courthouse broadcast he'd watched from his recliner. The way the judge spoke of walls of silence. How he'd remembered the exact sound our old cabinet made when it shut, and wished he'd opened it more. He wrote that he had cleaned out a drawer and found a copy of a tuition check in my mother's cursive, and had sat down hard on the edge of the bed. He wrote, simply, "I loved badly." On the counter, the radio shifted to a different voice. A reporter noting that Sophie had taken her social accounts private, then fully offline, following widespread concern over the manipulation of a minor's image. A short item mentioned Carl's resignation from a local committee and a rumor he'd taken a contract out of state. The news read like weather. Fronts moving on, leaving damp and debris. I folded my father's letter once, twice, a third time, until it fit the size of what I could carry. I set it beside the ivy and pressed it gently so the paper learned the shape of mercy. "Forgiveness," I said aloud to the empty room, "is the only way not to carry them with me." The sentence landed and stayed. Justice doesn't erase memory, but it makes memory hurt less. Keys sounded in the hall, a small shuffle I knew the way a baker knows the first click of an oven's preheat. The door eased open. Matt stood there in a sweatshirt too big for him, one hand fisted in the hem like a traveler gripping a ticket. He looked at the floor, then at me, then at the small green leaves curled toward the light. "Mom, can I stay tonight?" 2 years later, Ivy and Flower has 2 locations.
The butter smells the same.
The only difference is Matt's laughter. Downtown wakes differently. Streetcars chiming, cyclists flashing by, windows throwing coins of light onto the sidewalk. Our new storefront wears a living necklace of ivy, the leaves feeding on morning and rumor. Inside, mixers hum and trays parade to the case like well-rehearsed dancers. Laura is giving a tour to 2 new hires, showing them where the sheet pans nest, how the lids click when you've sealed them right, which timer lies. Matt, taller now and loose in the shoulders, stands at my elbow with a piping bag clutched like a trumpet. I guide his hands over the rabbit cookies, letting the glaze find its own edges. "Less squeezing," I say. "Let gravity help." He grins. The ears come out perfect. A reporter waits near the window, same calm eyes as that day outside the courthouse, now softened by routine and a pastry box. "What do you believe in most?" she asks when Laura waves her over. "Yeast and time," I say. "The quiet forces." She smiles like she's been given a headline by a baker who refuses to pretend. The doorbell rings, and a familiar voice jogs in backward, phone held high. "We're live," the vlogger announces to an audience I can't see. He pans across the ivy, the case, the faces. "She's the woman who turned silence into strength," he says, swinging back to me. I point to Matt without thinking. The camera follows. The comments ping on his screen like popcorn. Laura returns with a tray of shortbread and introduces the staff by first names only, the way you do when the work is the star. She leans close as the reporter packs up. "We're booked through Mother's Day," she says, faux casual, "and the wholesale account wants double on weekends." I nod, a gratitude that feels like breath rather than confession. The lunch crowd thins to a friendly tide. Matt disappears into the back and returns with a small box tied in green ribbon. He is suddenly shy, a habit he keeps for real things. "I made something," he says, pushing the box into my floury hands. Inside, a porcelain doll, small enough to sit in a teacup. The face has been repainted, not flawless now, but freckled, a scatter across the nose that looks like mine. The blue ribbon in its hair is smudged in one corner where a brush must have slipped, evidence of trying rather than perfection. The past tilts, then rights itself. He watches my mouth the way he used to watch other people's. He doesn't look over his shoulder. Ellen looked at the doll and whispered, "Thank you." Sunlight climbed the ivy and reflected on the glass like the first day. Some say ivy only grows where it's damp, but I've seen it thrive in sunlight. Morning comes to the backyard without ceremony, just a soft warmth finding brick, a thin breeze that carries the smell of wet earth and bakery sugar left in my hair. The wall is a living tapestry now, ivy stitching its green script over the old mortar, choosing its path the way a healed voice chooses tone, calm, certain. Unwilling to shout, I breathe with it. The window glass beside me holds a faint, kind mirror. It no longer cages anything. It simply reflects. Matt's bike clicks somewhere down the alley, a steady metronome of spokes. In a little while, he'll wheel back in, park against the fence, and ask if we can test a new glaze. I've been telling him pieces of the porcelain doll story in small, chewable bites. Facts, not blame. Names, not verdicts. He listens the way boys listen when they're building something. Head tilted, eyes on his hands, questions arriving like nails in a pocket. I tell him the important part. That love which asks you to disappear isn't love. That silence which protects a lie isn't kindness. That our kitchen is for voices,
not echoes. Laura appears at the gate with 2 paper cups and a grin that begins in her eyes. She holds up a framed photo. The first opening day. The ivy sketched on a napkin. The case full of rabbits. The light trying to crown us both. "You won," she says. Not like a headline, but like a diagnosis finally corrected. I laugh into my cup. Winning, it turns out, is quieter than I expected. It sounds like a lock that no longer catches, a child humming over batter, a woman who no longer checks the door before she speaks. Inside, on the sill, the tiny porcelain doll sits where sun can find it. The freckles Matt painted have cured to a soft, stubborn brown. I lift the figure and set it beside the glass, not behind it. No locked cabinets, no velvet prisons. The doll is a reminder, not a shrine. Outside, a leaf uncurls in slow motion, taking the shape of light itself. I think of my mother's handwriting across tuition slips, of Miss Brooks's sand tray, of Morgan's careful stacks, of the camera's square honesty, of Carl's fist on glass and the day it didn't make me flinch, of Sophie's spotlight cooling to daylight, of my father's late letter, folded small and kept where forgiveness can reach it. I think of the first rabbit cookie Matt ate without glancing over his shoulder. Memory remains, but the ache has softened around the edges, like bread the second day, still good, made better by toasting. Laura nudges my shoulder. "Frame needs hanging," she says. We find a nail, then another. Wood gives. The picture settles. Through the glass, my reflection meets me without negotiation. I can finally stand it. Justice arrived late, but it took root, and each morning I find myself greener. The camera drifts back to the wall, ivy massed and shining. Sunlight climbs the leaves and glances off the window, an emblem closing in light.